Well, for those of you who have stuck it out, your steadfastness will be rewarded. I'm listed as the president of Merkaz Olami, but I'm also a member of the executive committee of the JCRC and have known Michael Miller for about 25 years. He has successfully, as the executive vice president and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council, kept together 60 major civic, communal, educational, and religious organizations in the metropolitan area, and has expanded the work of the JCRC, both in the areas of intergroup relations, government relations, Israel relations, and is certainly known in the Jewish world as the go-to strategic individual for bridge building. JCRC, through its Cause New York division, has been hailed by the White House, Congress, City Hall as a trailblazing program whose focus is community and coalition building and training of youth and management. It is with great pleasure that I ask Michael to come to the podium and address the group.
Thank you, Steve, for that very, very warm introduction. I want to thank Karen for inviting me to this event for one very simple reason. The American Zionist movement had a precursor, many of you know, and it was the American Zionist Federation. The founding president of the American Zionist Federation was a Rabbi Israel Miller, who happened to have been my father, my late father. And in that capacity, he served at the end of his term as president of the AZF, as chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. So standing here and addressing the AZM, to me is almost like a family tradition, and I'm very honored to be standing before you today. The Jewish community has another tradition beyond just family, actually is part of family, and that's talking to itself, talking amongst itself. It's a good tradition, it's a valuable tradition, and we've engaged in it here today, and we've been engaging in it for as long as Jews have been living in America, and probably the same thing was true in Europe. But if you lift your eyes beyond this room and other such rooms and take a look at where we are here in America, let alone where we are here in New York, you'll see that things have actually changed. Back in the 1950s, there were somewhere around 2 million Jews, actually a few more than 2 million Jews, out of a general New York population of somewhere around 7 million. In New York City today, I'm talking about New York City, in New York City today, there aren't 2 million Jews, there are less than 1 million Jews. Of that less than 1 million Jews, somewhere around 250,000 of them are Jews who have only arrived here since the 1970s. The legacy of the 2 million Jews of the 1950s is at most 750,000. So we're now less than 1 million Jews out of somewhere around 8.5 million New Yorkers. 37% of all New Yorkers were born out of the United States of America, and the vast majority of those individuals, the vast majority, were not born in Israel, nor are they Jewish. With those realities, we need to come to grips with the fact that on issues related to Israel, we can no longer just rely upon ourselves to advocate on our own behalf. There was a contentious congressional race that took place just 2 weeks ago, and the victor was a non-Jew by the name of Bob Turner. The loser was a Jew by the name of David Weprin. I know from personal experience and having taken it on the chin many times, where many in the Jewish community say, we don't want non-Jews representing our community, we only want Jews representing our community. Well, here it was that Jews decided they wanted a non-Jew to represent them. Bob Turner is an exception in the fact that Bob Turner happens to be white. The majority of New Yorkers are not white. They're either black or they're Latino, and the Asian population is growing by leaps and bounds. And if all that we're going to be doing is speaking amongst ourselves, and I'll add, arguing amongst ourselves, sniping amongst ourselves, we've lost completely what the realities are here in New York, and I would add what the realities are in the United States of America. Yes, we do have a third-term mayor, Mike Bloomberg, who happens to be Jewish, and his predecessor was Rudy Giuliani, who was white of Italian heritage. But his predecessor, who was not a very good mayor, but nonetheless, his predecessor was David Dinkins, and the future here in New York, because we don't know who the next mayor is going to be, is likely not going to be, for the future, I'm not talking about the next 4 years or even the next 8 years, but is likely not going to be somebody who is Jewish, let alone somebody who looks like us, who is Caucasian. Why? Because they're the majority and we are not. And if all that we're going to be doing is sticking our head into the sands and thinking back to Ed Koch and Abe Beame and Mike Bloomberg, we're not thinking straight. We've lost it. The issue of BDS, the issue of delegitimization, isn't to convince only ourselves that Israel is legitimate and has a right to exist, and sometimes that's difficult, as Dan pointed out, with both those particularly on the far left as well as those on the far right. Our objective is to ensure that the majority of New Yorkers and the majority of Americans, all 98% of them, agree that Israel is legitimate and has a right to exist. The challenge that we're faced with here is not a military challenge. Israel is faced with a military challenge. Israel needs an Israel Defense Forces. And I'm very proud to say that my son served in a combat unit serving in the Gaza Strip during the Second Intifada with the Givati Brigade. Yes, it's wonderful, and it's something which we need to identify with and support, that Israel be strong enough and, as Dan said, maintain that military qualitative edge. But we need a qualitative edge here in a different battle, and that's a public relations battle. And we're up against some formidable forces. Those who support BDS write stuff like this. They demand that Israel end all apartheid policies. Inspired by the struggle of South Africans against apartheid, we, representatives of Palestinian civil society, call upon international civil society organizations and people of conscience all over the world to impose broad boycotts and implement divestment initiatives against Israel similar to those applied to South Africa in the apartheid era. So for us, with apartheid now relegated to the ash heap of history, of what value is this to us? But to blacks, to African Americans, to Latinos, and even to Asians. Something about apartheid and associating apartheid with Israel potentially could ring true. Well, what do we do about it? What do we do about accusations against Israel that is hostile, that it's racist? Look what Abbas said at the United Nations just a few days ago. Racist. Think of an African American, of a Latino, of an Asian, listening to that speech, if they bothered to listen to that speech or read about it in the newspaper, and say, Israel? Racist? I want to learn some more. It's our objective not only to educate ourselves so that we become intelligently supportive of Israel, but that we transfer that information to others who are not like us and who don't have the same background that we do, who don't come from the same heritage that we do, who don't even look like us. I believe that we need to engage in what I'll refer to as the 3 M's. We need to engage in meetings, in missions, and in missionizing. Let me explain. Meetings. As important as this meeting is, and it is important, it's so important that non-Jews are exposed to Israelis, or knowledgeable Jews, or knowledgeable non-Jews, to tell the truth about Israel. As Malcolm was saying a few minutes ago, the truth about Israel. Secondly, there's only one effective way. Let me repeat. One, change it a little bit, most effective way to be able to communicate and teach about Israel. And I think it was Len Cole was talking about his role with Birthright. Why is Birthright so successful? Because it takes young Jews, picks them up from cities, towns, villages in the United States of America and elsewhere, puts them on a plane in a group of people just like them, in an affinity group, and ships them off to Israel for a week or 10 days. If it works for them, might it not work for non-Jews as well? For over 25 years at the JCRC and other JCRCs across the country, but I can speak for mine. The JCRC of New York, we have taken to Israel, not just sent, taken to Israel more than 1,000 leaders from the non-Jewish world. Leaders who may start like a John Liu, who's now the controller of the city of New York. We took him when he was still a businessman in Queens. And he arose from there to become a city council member, and then eventually the controller of the city of New York, one of the 3 citywide officials here in New York. Or what about a Greg Meeks, who's African-American, who was a member of the New York State Assembly, who not only sits in Congress, but sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee? Or what about any other one of the Black, Latino, or Asian individuals here in New York who gets to see Israel through their own eyes? Yes, we provide the filter, but they are there, feet on the ground, traveling around Israel. Just came back a few weeks ago with taking a group. It didn't have any congresspersons on the group, but we did have a deputy mayor. We did have the public advocate of the city of New York. But more importantly, we had a Sikh, we had an Indian, we had several Koreans, we had several blacks, we had several Latinos. So what did we do with them? Did we sit around in a hotel in Jerusalem and just meet with people? The answer is no. Sitting in a hotel in Jerusalem is not a bad thing to do. Meeting with people is all the more important thing to do. But where did we take people? We took them to Sderot. We took them to the Lebanese border. We took them to the Syrian border. How important it is that they see Israel, the realities of Israel, the strategic realities of Israel beyond, and one cannot minimize this, beyond walking on the streets of Jerusalem or through the tunnels along the Kotel, underneath the Kotel, all the way north along the Western Wall, and to walk on the same pavements from their perspective that Jesus walked on. I can't do that for the Indians, but I can certainly do it for the Christians. It's identifying with a collective history, a collective attachment to Israel, seeing the threats that Israel faces, but realizing that Israel is beyond the past 63 years, and hopefully forever and ever, but goes back thousands of years with a common connection. Missions. The third M, I'll end with this, is missionizing. I was thinking very hard about what that third M should be. Maybe it should be Michigas. No, this is no Michigas associated with this. What's missionizing? We've been battling here in New York, as Judy Shapiro has been a longtime board member of the JCRC, and Steve Wolnick certainly know. We had a task force on missionaries and cults. We were battling the Jews for Jesus. I've been hauled into federal court, all different kinds of things to protect the integrity of the Jewish community of New York from these very deceitful missionizers, proselytizers. But there's one thing that missionizers and proselytizers do. They try to effectuate a personal relationship. They just don't want to steal our souls. In order to do that, they need to get to know us and who we are. We need to get to know who the non-Jewish communities of New York and America are. Get to know them personally. Some of that is done on a mission to Israel, and some of that is done in meetings. But it's more important to identify those individuals who are critical influencers within their respective communities and build relationships with them. Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, yes, even Muslims. Why? Why? We're not going to make Muslims into Zionists. But we could effectively, and we have effectively here in New York, been able to blunt those who are anti-Zionists, who don't work against us. So they don't want to be supportive of Israel. They don't want to donate to the organizations represented here in this room or are members of the AZM. But we don't want them working against us. Yes, it would be wonderful if we could convince them to join our forces. One day, one or two of them might actually do that if they're not worried about their future. But nonetheless, the work that we have to do, missionizing, sending folks on missions to Israel, and bringing them to meetings where they learn about Israel, is a full-time responsibility, not just for a JCRC of New York, not just for the JCRC community, but for all the organizations that are here. As I said, particularly for those who live in the metropolitan area, we live among non-Jews. We need to befriend those non-Jews. And hopefully they will indeed become friends. And hopefully indeed, as has been the case time and again for this press conference that's taking place tomorrow, there will be some non-Jewish friends standing there supporting Israel, supporting Israel's cause, and opposing the unilateral declaration of independence for the state of Palestine. I just want to end with something that David Dabchik, who will be coming up to the microphone, I think, I see him sitting in the back, for the next session. David spoke about a petition. There was a petition drive that was launched initially by the JCRC, and we're very pleased to have had the Israel Action Network join together with us. As of I left the house this morning, 104,748 individuals have signed on to this petition. In fact, I have a very large blow-up of that petition right over there, because we did a little photo op with Minister Edelstein before he went back to Israel, because we want the Israelis to know that they indeed do have friends. Truly, the majority of those signing on were members of our Jewish community, but not all, not all. And I think one of our major responsibilities, one of the imperatives that we have as Jewish leaders, if we are to be Jewish leaders, is that we not keep it just unto ourselves, but we share with others. Thank you very much for providing me this opportunity.